Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we aren't just looking at a place on a map or even, a disputed territory. We are diving into something far deeper. A collective memory, a symbol of unyielding spiritual and physical resistance, and for millions across the globe, a shared, agonizing wound. We are talking about Kudüs, Jerusalem.
And to guide this exploration, we are focusing intensely on a single powerful source provided by one of our listeners. It's Muhammed Kurtcephe's book, Taşları Ağlayan Şehir Kudüs. And that translates literally to the city whose stones weep. And I think it's important to state up front, this is not a detached historical analysis, not at all. This book is a narrative that deeply interweaves theological claims, visceral emotional experience, and very selected historical anecdotes to present a comprehensive worldview of the conflict.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack this specific, highly charged narrative. We need to extract the powerful nuggets of knowledge that define the author's historical claims, explore this central concept of custodianship he brings up, and really try to understand the emotional and human impact of the struggle, but all through the very specific lens of the material that's in front of us.
Exactly. And at the very heart of Kurtcephe's perspective lies a core organizing concept that I think we have to understand right away. Kudüs is not merely a geography. It's what the author terms an eminent.
Eminent. Can you break that down for us? Because it's more than just trust, isn't it?
Oh, far more. It implies a sacred, a divine inheritance or covenant. The person who holds it, the custodian, is morally and spiritually accountable for it. So the book presents Kudüs as this sacred trust, a place where the very stones themselves are said to, weep and talk because they're so burdened by history and, pregnant with expectation.
That's a fascinating way to frame it. The stakes are immediately raised from political to spiritual. Let's unpack this metaphor of the weeping stones and see how it shapes the entire narrative structure, starting with the city as a living, breathing entity.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's start with that emotional core, because you're right, the source material treats the city less like real estate and much more like a main character. It's a living being whose fate sort of mirrors the fate of humanity. The descriptions are profoundly poetic. Adı diğerde dua, yüzü kıbleye dönük. Its name is a prayer on the tongue, its face turned towards the Qibla.
It's a deliberate and profound personification. The text insists that you cannot understand Kudüs by looking at maps or, statistics alone.
Yeah.
It portrays the city as a sentient entity, a place where silence itself is interpreted as a cry. And the centuries-old, imposing walls are recast as silent witnesses who have absorbed the sorrows in countless wars over millennia.
And there's that one line that really stood out to me. The author suggests that to truly grasp the city's essence, you must understand the heart of a child hidden beneath a stone.
Yes. That phrase just captures the blend of immense ancient history with this fragile, immediate human experience. A city that is unforgotten, the narrative asserts, is always standing tall, even when it's physically surrounded by captivity. It's a very powerful image.
And this resistance, which is the author's primary emotional anchor, is voiced through a specific, highly symbolic persona, Hanzala. Hanzala isn't just a character, right? His name itself is steeped in meaning.
Deeply. It signifies defiance, resistance, standing tall against forgetfulness.
Yeah.
He becomes the vessel through which the author narrates the emotional, the visceral loss of the city, all through the eyes of a child.
And that initial narrative section is so crucial because it establishes this premise of a shared, almost idyllic history before describing the loss.
Absolutely. It details Hanzala's cherished childhood ritual, exploring the city alongside his father. His father is described as this masterful guide, someone who had the ability to make the stone speak.
And he doesn't just show him the Muslim parts of the city.
No, and this is a key point in the source. The father deliberately guides Hanzala through all the city's quarters, the Jewish, the Christian, alongside the Muslim ones. He does this to emphasize that the city belongs to all faiths, that it's woven together into one complex, irreplaceable fabric. This moment, right at the beginning, establishes the city as a historical capital of pluralism, at least in the author's view.
And that initial foundation makes the subsequent betrayal and loss that much more impactful when the tone shifts so dramatically.
Exactly. The shift is signaled subtly at first. Hanzala just notes the sudden appearance of fear in the elder's eyes, palpable change in the atmosphere. The uniformed men who had previously been, confined to distant checkpoints are suddenly patrolling the narrow, familiar streets. The darkness just descends as the forced departure begins.
The description of the expulsion is agonizingly personal. What were the specific words used to capture that moment of losing their home?
Hanzala recalls the devastating feeling. Our feet prints carved into our land were erased. They were cast out, forced to leave behind not just physical structures, but their memories, their very identity carved into the geography. This act of being made rootless is portrayed as a profound spiritual violation.
But the section doesn't end in despair. It actually ends with a covenant, a solemn promise from Hanzala.
Yes, and this promise becomes the narrative engine for the entire book. It's what drives everything. Hanzala commits to return and, crucially, to tell the story, to ensure the history of Kudüs is never left incomplete, that it's never successfully erased by the occupiers. His vow is simple. This story will never be left unfinished. It transforms this personal loss into a shared, enduring commitment for all future generations.
So Hanzala's vow connects directly to this broader theme of juvenile resistance, the Taşları, the children of the stones.
That's right.
The source states this is a generation whose toys were literally stolen and whose very existence, whose very game, is now a struggle for survival.
That's the crux of this section. The daily life of a child in Kudüs, according to the author, is not seen as normal. It is inherently a struggle. And the stone in these children's hands is fundamentally presented not as an instrument of violence or hatred, but as a silent existential plea. It's a cry of existence itself.
The cry is, "Hear me."
Hear me. They are not throwing missiles. The author insists they are throwing words.
That distinction, the stone as a word, the stone as a poem, that's really key to understanding the source's ethical framing of resistance, isn't it?
It truly is. The slingshot, the sapan, is elevated beyond a mere weapon. It's transformed into a poem. The author suggests this action is an articulation of forgotten history, a deliberate attempt to turn a simple object into a vessel carrying memory, prayer, and expectation.
So the child's act of throwing a stone is framed as an outcry of a heart against forgetfulness. It's a demand that the world recognize their unforgotten history and their right to return.
Yes. It seems like the source is actively working to depoliticize the stone, framing it instead as a theological or narrative tool. And this resistance, according to the author, isn't just confined to physical confrontation. The text highlights a vital cultural resistance that is just as powerful in maintaining the eminent.
Right. Tell us more about those softer forms of resistance.
Well, resistance takes forms that can pierce the silence in the softest way. It's expressed through art, through music, and the book specifically mentions the playing of the keyman, the violin through poetry that defies censorship, and through defiant graffiti painted on the walls that serve as those silent witnesses.
So the youth are portrayed as actively reconstructing their identity and memory. They're asserting their presence not just through force, but through an unwavering cultural persistence.
The narrative position here is that if they stop creating, if they stop singing and telling stories, they hand the occupier their greatest victory.
Which is the victory of hopelessness and erasure.
Precisely. It's clear that the author views these acts, whether they're mundane or dramatic, not as mere political protests, but as existential imperatives. It's the only way for that heart of a child hidden beneath a stone to keep the city's identity beating.
An internal mobilization. They have to maintain their memory because memory, in the context of Kudüs, is the ultimate form of resistance. If the memory of the prophetic heritage and past justice dies, then the eminent is truly lost.
Exactly. Which leads us perfectly to the historical and theological roots the author uses to buttress this claim of custodianship.
Okay, let's make that transition from the emotional narrative to the deep historical and theological foundations that the book uses to stake its claim on custodianship.
This is where the argument becomes very specific. It's rooted entirely in the Islamic tradition of Tawhid, or absolute monotheism. The author argues that Kudüs is fundamentally Muslim territory because its heritage begins not with any single later prophet, but with the very first man. It grounds the claim in a, 6,000-year-old lineage.
And this connects directly to the source's key historical claims about Masjid Aqsa, or the Al-Aqsa Mosque. What is the specific historical claim cited here?
The author is careful to provide textual proof from the Islamic tradition. They cite a hadith, a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, to assert that Masjid Aqsa was founded 40 years after the Kaaba in Mecca.
Okay, so that establishes Al-Aqsa as the second holiest site, with an ancient history rooted in the very beginnings of monotheistic worship.
Yes, and furthermore, the source explicitly invokes the Quranic perspective on the prophetic lineage. It specifically cites a verse from Surah Ali Imran.
And what does that verse establish, according to this narrative?
It establishes the crucial claim that the foundational figures of this lineage, most importantly Abraham, or Ibrahim, were neither Jewish nor Christian in the denominational sense of the word. They were Muslim.
In the core linguistic sense of the word.
Yes, meaning they submitted their will wholly to God. This perspective allows the source to position Islam as the true, final protector and inheritor of this unified prophetic path that flows through Kudus. It links the city's destiny to the final revelation. The city, therefore, belongs to the continuum of Tawhid.
That is a profound theological claim. It positions Islam not as a competitor, but as the fulfillment and legitimate heir to all previous revelations centered in Kudus. How does the author then use the specific stories of the prophets, like David, to bridge that gap between ancient history and modern resistance?
This is a critical narrative maneuver. The story of David, or Hurst Davud, is presented as a clear archetype for the Taşın Ağlayan.
The children of the stones we just discussed.
Exactly. It explicitly links him back to them. Davud's confrontation with the giant Goliath, or Kalut, is recast in the source as a struggle against overwhelming spiritual and physical tyranny. Kalut is defined as representing fear and despair, a crushing tyranny that had successfully suffocated all hope among the Israelites.
So Davud becomes the symbol of hope against despair.
Precisely. Davud chose faith over heavy armor. He confronted the giant, not with military technology, but with a simple slingshot and a stone. And the source deeply personifies this stone, insisting it was not just random ammunition, but was shaped by prayer and thrown with faith.
So it's an expression of total reliance on God. It echoes that concept of secti submission that we'll get to later.
It does. And the resulting victory is not just a military triumph, it's a spiritual revolution. It's portrayed as a cosmic shift. When Kalut fell, the sound, according to the source, was the cracking of an era, the end of tyranny and the beginning of a return to justice.
And this historical anecdote is used to directly legitimize the modern juvenile resistance.
The implication is powerful. Every child in Fİlistin today is depicted as a little bit Davud. Their stone is their memory, prayer, expectation, a timeless tool of faith wielded against overwhelming tyrannical force. And Davud, of course, went on to establish his kingdom and begin the spiritual rebuilding of Jerusalem.
A kingdom-building legacy that was then carried on by his son, Solomon Suleiman. The source describes his rule in great detail as being unique, established through wisdom, balance, and profound divine favor.
Suleiman's dominion was truly exceptional, making him the ideal ruler for a city meant to be a capital of justice. He was granted control that went beyond human understanding, control over the wind, the ability to command the jinns.
Spiritual beings.
Yes, and the birds, and he could even understand the language of ants. His rule was founded on divine knowledge and cosmic balance, not just military or political might. And this balance is what the author holds up as the ultimate standard of just governance.
What examples does the source use to illustrate this divine wisdom and humility?
The focus is often on humility, despite immense power. There is the famous story of the ant. Suleiman, marching with his vast, powerful army, heard an ant warn its colony. Suleiman and his army might crush you unawares. Now, rather than reacting with arrogance or annoyance at being overheard, Suleiman paused. He was moved to a deep prayer of thanks and humility that he had been granted the favor to understand even the smallest of creatures. The source uses this to demonstrate that true power requires ultimate compassion.
And the hoopoe bird, the hudhud, served a diplomatic function, correct?
Yes, the hudhud acted as his intelligence officer, demonstrating that Suleiman's network was divine and far-reaching. The bird brought news from the distant Queen of Sheba, Belkis, which initiated a peaceful diplomatic exchange. And the letter that began this exchange started with the phrase, "In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful," which just emphasizes that all of Suleiman's political dealings and wisdom were rooted in a divine framework.
This all culminates in the construction of Al-Aqsa, which the source seals with 3 key prayers. It cites the tradition recorded by Ibn Mes. What were those 3 critical petitions?
These 3 prayers, made during the construction of Al-Aqsa, are presented as the spiritual charter for the city. First, Suleiman asked for the divine ability to rule with absolute justice. This is critical justice as a primary function of the ruler. Second, he prayed for a unique kingdom, a mulk that no one after him would be granted, recognizing the singular divine favor he enjoyed. And third, and most movingly, he prayed for the masses, that Allah would forgive the sins of all who came to pray there. These prayers transformed the physical structure into a permanent sanctuary of forgiveness and divine blessing for the Ummah.
So Kudus is established as a center of justice, wisdom, and forgiveness, which leads up to the ultimate event that cements its centrality in Islam, the Night of Ascension, the Miras.
The Miras is the ultimate, non-negotiable event in this narrative. Kudus is elevated beyond a terrestrial city and becomes the doorway to heaven. The Prophet Muhammad was miraculously transported from Mecca to Masjid-i-Aqsa. There he led all the previous prophets, Musa, Isa, Ibrahim, and others, in a collective prayer.
And this act is the symbolic and spiritual transfer of the prophetic mantle.
Yes, to the Muslim Ummah, the global community of believers. From that moment, Kudus was cemented not just as a historical city, but as the second holy site, tied irrevocably to the faith itself, representing the convergence, completion, and custodianship of all previous revelations.
It sounds like the author meticulously lays out this prophetic history to argue that Islam's claim is one of spiritual completion and heritage, not conquest, and this sets a very high bar for the conduct of the subsequent rulers.
Absolutely. The bar is Adala justice. The source presents the historical rule of Islam as the only period that successfully lived up to that prophetic standard.
Okay, so with that prophetic mantle established, the source pivots to claim that Islam was the most just custodian of Kudus. And the pivotal moment here is the peaceful entry of the second caliph, Omar Umar.
The description of Umar's arrival in the Hijri 17th year is meticulously crafted to emphasize simplicity, humility, and justice. It's the foundation of his authority, and it's contrasted sharply with traditional military conquest. The narrative insists he arrived not with a magnificent army, but specifically with the justice of the Quran.
Right, and he was wearing simple clothes, and there's the famous story of him sharing the camel ride with his servant.
Exactly. He insisted they take turns walking, demonstrating that spiritual status outweighs worldly rank. This immediate, performative display of humility set the moral standard for all subsequent Islamic rule in the city.
And his most powerful act upon entering established Kudus as a capital of justice in a way that truly resonates with this theme of pluralism.
That was the act of tolerance that defines this period in the book. Umar was invited to pray inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Quds al-Kabir Kilisesi, the holiest site in all of Christianity.
And he refused.
He respectfully refused. And his reason was just as important as the act itself. He refused precisely because he wanted to prevent any future Muslim ruler or community from using his precedent as an excuse to convert the church into a mosque. He prayed outside, ensuring that the existing sanctity of Christian worship was physically and legally protected.
That's a powerful lesson in establishing boundaries and respecting diversity. He also had to address the neglected site of Masjid-i-Aqsa itself, which had fallen into ruin.
That's right. When the site was shown to him, it was covered in rubble and debris and weeds, just left neglected by previous rulers. The source describes Umar kneeling down and personally cleaning the site with his own hands. This wasn't delegation, this was the caliph insisting that he should lift these stones with his own sweat. A powerful gesture that was a statement. The restoration of Al-Aqsa was a sacred duty rooted in personal sacrifice, not just a governmental chore.
And this theme of practical justice continues centuries later, especially during the Ottoman period. It's encapsulated perfectly by the tradition of the silent trust, the Muslim families entrusted with the keys to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
This is a profound example of functional, practical interfaith harmony and governance. The source details that due to constant and often violent disputes among the various Christian denominations, Greek Orthodox, Catholics, Armenians, Copts over control and access to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Ottoman authorities decided to neutralize the conflict.
And how did they achieve that neutrality?
They famously entrusted the key and the custody of the door to a neutral Muslim family, the Nusaybee family, while another family, the Quds family, handled the closing duties. And this tradition is not a historical footnote. It is a centuries-old, living mechanism that guarantees peace and access for all denominations.
It's incredible that this tradition continues even today.
Yes. It has survived changes in governments, empires, and occupations for centuries. The author uses this arrangement as irrefutable proof that Islam's tolerance is not just a theoretical word, but a mechanism of governance. And it fulfills the Quranic mandate to protect all places of worship. The source explicitly connects this to a verse in the Quran from Surah Hajj.
Which verse is that?
It's the one that states that God defends those who believe, and if not for the protection of certain people by others, then monasteries, churches, synagogues, and mosques in which the name of Allah is much mentioned would have been destroyed. So these key-holding families are the silent, living guardians of this historical pluralism.
We finally arrive at the Ottoman legacy that anchored this justice, specifically the concept of the water civilization, established by Yavuz Sultan Selim and Kanuni Sultan Suleiman.
Yavuz Sultan Selim, though his physical tenure as caliph was short and he never actually entered Kudus, is portrayed as having this powerful emotional bond. He famously stated that Kudüs was conquered in my heart long ago.
Uh,
He immediately recognized the strategic and humanitarian importance of water, issuing an order to repair the ancient water routes, knowing that controlling the water meant controlling the welfare and future of the city.
And this critical infrastructure project, the provision of clean water, was fully realized under the next great Sultan, Kanuni Sultan Suleiman. And it was specifically championed by his wife, Hürrem Sultan, through the construction of the Haseki Sultan Kuliyesi. We should probably clarify what a Kuliyesi is for our listeners.
Right. A Kuliyesi is far more than a single building. It is a comprehensive charitable complex. It's usually centered around a mosque, but it also incorporates a school, a madrasa, public baths, a soup kitchen or imaret, and crucial public works, like the water system. The Haseki Sultan Kuliyesi provided vast social services, securing the welfare of the poor and pilgrims. The water system itself was really the pinnacle of this project.
And the source emphasizes that the distribution of this water was the ultimate symbol of justice.
Absolutely. It wasn't just about providing water, it was about the equity of the provision. The source emphasizes a core principle of Ottoman rule. All people, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish, drank from the very same spouts. This symbolized Ottoman justice, a justice where the water of the Ottoman also came from heaven. It descended from the heart and met the soil.
So the policy ignored religious and ethnic lines when it came to basic human necessities.
It underscored the deep commitment to impartial, universal, adolate justice, which the author argues is necessary to fulfill the terms of the eminent.
That is a striking image. Justice literally flowing from the same spout for everyone. It shows that custodianship was not just a theoretical role, but a practical, daily commitment. But of course, this era of custodianship eventually comes to a catastrophic end.
Yes, this is the source's most painful section. It transitions from that era of justice to the period of political weakness and eventual loss. The narrative strongly focuses on the pivotal resistance of the last great sultan, Abdülhamid II, who attempted to halt the tide of dispossession.
Abdülhamid II is revered in this source material as the one who recognized the ultimate danger, and he attempted to build a legal trench against it. His resistance against Zionist demands for land purchase in 1901 is presented as the critical defining moment of his reign.
The stakes were astronomical. Theodor Herzl, the father of modern Zionism, offered to settle the massive, crippling Ottoman debt, which was bankrupting the empire.
Yeah.
And he offered to provide sweeping international political support in exchange for Palestine. This was a lifeline offered to a dying empire, but Abdülhamid saw it as selling a sacred trust.
And his refusal was absolute, transcending mere political decision-making.
His answer is preserved in the narrative as definitive. Fİlistin is not for sale. He declared emphatically that the land belonged not to him personally, but to the entire Muslim Ummah, the global community of believers. He said it was sealed with sexity, prostration, not with money. This framed the land as a spiritual asset, an emanet that could not be exchanged for any temporal or financial gain.
But he did more than just refuse the offer. He took concrete and frankly genius legal steps to make the land acquisition almost impossible after his reign. This is where we need to elaborate on the Hazine Ihasa.
This is key, and it's why the source elevates him beyond a simple rejectionist. He realized that political opposition wouldn't last forever, so he built a legal fortress. He strategically protected Kudüs by legally enrolling the vast majority of those lands into the Hazine Ihasa, which was the Sultan's private treasury and estate.
Why was this so smart? Tell us the mechanics.
Well, moving the land to the Sultan's private property prevented lower officials, provincial governors, or even later weakened central governments from easily authorizing sales. It created an intentional bureaucratic barrier, a legal choke point. Any sale would require the Sultan's direct, personal, and legally protected approval. This maneuver secured the lands against foreign influence and internal corruption, buying precious time and establishing what the author calls a legal trench.
And even after he was deposed in 1909, he didn't give up.
No. He adamantly refused to surrender the Kudüs land deeds, viewing them as a sacred trust rather than mere bureaucratic records.
The source then shifts to the emotional finality of the Ottoman departure, marked by the incredibly powerful anecdote of Onbaşı Hasan, Private Hassan.
This story is the emotional climax of the loss of the eminent. Onbaşı Hasan was a young Ottoman soldier from Izmir who in 1917 was part of the last guard protecting Al-Aqsa. As the Ottoman army was forced to withdraw, his commander gave him a simple, profound order. Kudüs is our trust, we will not abandon it.
And what did this young private do when the army pulled out?
Hasan took the order literally. He remained near the Silsile gate of Al-Aqsa, maintaining his post in uniform. He continued this silent, defiant act of loyalty for 55 years.
55 years.
55 years. He was not a refugee. He was an active guard waiting for the order to stand down, an order that never came from his Ottoman superiors.
That image alone defines the source's concept of sacred duty and eminent.
It is the ultimate embodiment of loyalty to the sacred trust. The story recounts his final, moving moment of defiance. Shortly before his death in 1982, he delivered his final military report, his tekmil, to a Turkish journalist named Ahan Bardakçı. Hassan stated simply, "Private Hassan, commander of the 11th Heavy Machine Gun Squad from Izmir, did not abandon his post. His report is complete."
Wow. The source uses the symbolic event to mark the beginning of the days of sorrow, signifying that the end of the Ottoman protective power meant the withdrawal of a physical guardian and the beginning of the Great Vulnerability.
Yes. And once that protective power was gone, the source argues, the invasion methods shifted. They moved from military confrontation to a silent, systematic, paper-based occupation.
The material meticulously outlines how the land was invaded, istila, through administrative and diplomatic mechanisms designed to erode the Arab majority.
It started long before the physical occupation with the Balfour Declaration in 1917. This declaration, drafted in a few sentences in London, is presented as an act of colonial arrogance that changed the fate of millions. It fundamentally ignored the existence and rights of the 90% Arab population already living there.
And the land acquisition became systematic rather than spontaneous.
Exactly. The source notes that Zionist agencies systematically bought land, often using the economic vulnerability, debt, or pressure against vulnerable Arab villagers. This silent acquisition was facilitated by the British Mandate era, which the author views as a deliberate administrative tool. The Mandate allowed the immigration of prepared settlers who, the source notes, brought not just their belongings and ideology, but weapons, deliberately setting the stage for future conflict and dispossession.
Finally, we have to discuss the highly charged account of regional betrayal, focusing on the anger surrounding King Abdullah I of Jordan and his assassination in 1951. And we must handle this part of the source material with careful attribution.
Absolutely. The source presents a narrative where King Abdullah was viewed by a significant portion of the Palestinian community, including figures cited like Mustafa the Tailor and Musa, as a profound and absolute traitor. The accusation, which we must attribute solely to the source material, was that he made secret agreements with the Zionists and had sold the land of Palestine piece by piece, that he compromised the sacred duty of the eminent for political gain.
So his public visits to Al-Aqsa were not seen as acts of piety in the eyes of the resistance, but rather as hypocrisy.
They were viewed by the resistance figures in the source as a ritual of betrayal, where he attempted to cloak his deeply compromised political actions in religious legitimacy by visiting the very place he was accused of selling out. The source emphasizes that Mustafa's decision to act was fueled by the belief that the king was a shadow betraying the future of Kudüs. It views his assassination as a necessary consequence of what they saw as absolute betrayal against the sacred trust of the city.
So the assassination is framed within the context of this specific book as a moral correction against a ruler who had failed the ultimate test of custodianship.
That's how the book presents it. It creates a clear trajectory, from Abdülhamid's valiant refusal to Onbaşı Hassan's lonely post to the systematic land acquisition and finally to the regional political betrayal, all leading inexorably toward the ultimate catastrophe.
Which brings us to the next section. We now move to the official proclamation of the state, which the source adamantly frames not as a founding moment, but as the Nakba, the Great Destruction.
The proclamation of the State of Israel on May 14, 1948, is defined by Palestinians as the Nakba, or the catastrophe. The source details the devastating consequences that accompanied this proclamation: the forced expulsion of an estimated 750,000 people, the systematic destruction of 500 villages, and the continuing reality that the Nakba is still ongoing.
So it's explicitly not viewed as a fixed historical event that ended in 1948.
Not at all. It's a continuous living reality of displacement, violence, and identity erasure.
And Kudüs today is explicitly described as being the center of a demographic war, a demographics of us. This suggests the conflict is fought not just with weapons, but with zoning laws and birth rates.
That demographic war is relentless and multifaceted, according to the source. It involves the aggressive expansion of settlements around and within the city, systematic governmental efforts to erase the city's indigenous memory, like the removal of Arabic street signs and the renaming of neighborhoods, and of course the highly controversial tunnel excavations beneath the Al-Aqsa compound.
The source notes those tunnel excavations are carried out under the pretext of searching for the ruins of Solomon's temple.
Correct. And the author views these actions as far more than archaeology. They are seen as a deliberate structural campaign to destabilize the foundations of the Muslim holy sites and to erase the Muslim and Arab identity of the city from the subsoil upward. The goal in this view is total demographic and historical dominance, making the city unrecognizable to those who hold the eminent.
Yet, despite this ongoing catastrophe, the source maintains that resistance is synonymous with existence. How does the author define this continuing daily resistance?
The definition is beautiful and powerful. Living itself is portrayed as a sacred form of resistance. A child going to school, a mother cooking a traditional meal, a father weeping during the Izan, the call to prayer. These are not passive acts. They are transformed into assertions of identity and permanence.
So the cultural resistance we mentioned earlier, the poetry, the music, the graffiti, all contribute to this essential struggle against historical and demographic erasure.
Yes, the author insists that existing in the face of relentless pressure is the highest form of loyalty to the city.
And there's physical, legal evidence that fuels this resilience, which links back directly to the history we covered. The power of documents, specifically the Ottoman deeds.
This is a crucial practical point. For Palestinians, these documents, the old land deeds, the tapas, are not just ownership papers. They are identity and historical truth solidified on paper. The Ottoman deeds, the very same type of documents Abdülhamid fought to protect under the Hazine Hassa, are held up as crucial legal defenses against the erasure of the historical narrative.
So the deeds are not just proof of ownership in a modern court, but proof of historical presence.
Precisely. The source details the powerful image of refugees, now living in camps, sometimes generations removed from the city, still holding their original keys in their old tapas. They maintain this commitment, this promise to return, rooted in the legal and spiritual legitimacy of those documents. The memory of the home, preserved through documents and shared generational trauma, ensures that the history remains unforgotten, fulfilling Hanzala's earlier childhood promise that this story will never be left unfinished.
And this promise of return is visibly reiterated every year, ensuring the world doesn't forget the original wound.
Absolutely. Every year on May 15th, Nakba Day Palestinians actively and globally remind the world that they still possess homes, still possess the documents, and still possess the memory to return. It is an annual reaffirmation that the catastrophe is ongoing and the fight for the eminent continues. It connects the modern child with the first stone thrown by Dawood and the first peaceful entry by Omar.
It's clear that the source intends to provide a complete, unbroken narrative of historical and spiritual legitimacy for one side of this conflict.
That is the ultimate goal of Taşları Ağlayan Şehir Kudüs, to solidify the view that the conflict is not a territorial dispute between two equal parties, but a spiritual and ethical crisis caused by the failure to honor the long tradition of justice and custodianship.
All right, let's try to bring this all together.
As we synthesize the powerful, detailed narratives provided in Taşları Ağlayan Şehir Kudüs, we see that the entire struggle, through the lens of this source, is defined by three core, interdependent principles. First, eminent, a sacred trust. Then, adalet, justice. And finally, sekte, prostration or faith. The core argument is unwavering. Kudüs is not merely a political dispute. It is a spiritual test that measures the moral fitness of its ruler. And ultimately, no power built on injustice can endure eternally.
And what we've tracked, from the exemplary tolerance demonstrated by Kurtcephe refusing to pray inside the church, to the pragmatic Ottoman tradition of providing shared water where all people drank from the same spout, is a profound historical model of pluralism and universal justice that the source argues is fundamentally absent today. The fight for Kudüs, in this context, is presented as a fight for historical truth and the future of human conscience, demanding the restitution of that historical justice.
And the source material leaves us with a profound final thought that shifts the entire focus from external conflict and political blame to internal moral responsibility for the global community. The book constantly poses the challenging question: Kudüs is ours, but are we worthy of Kudüs?
That shifts the weight entirely. It moves from demanding political outcomes to ensuring personal and collective moral fitness to carry the sacred burden. It's not about military might or political treaties, it's about moral legacy.
Exactly. The final implication is that accepting this eminent requires action that goes beyond mere remembrance or political rhetoric. It requires sacrifice, justice, and unwavering faith. The very last sentence of the book reminds us of this ultimate challenge. Kudüs is a sekte. It is an act of total submission to God, a moral obligation.
So the provocative final thought we leave you with, based on the weeping stones of Kudüs, is this. If Kudüs is a sacred trust, what practical action, what form of living justice or sekte does accepting this sacred inheritance require of you, the individual, in the complex, overwhelming, and modern world? Think about that standard of justice established by Omar and Suleiman and ask yourself what true custodianship looks like today.